What's up, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion, BIPOC Late Night and Variety Writers Speak Out. My name is Raquel Harris, and I'm super excited to be moderating this conversation that continues the discussion around the experiences of BIPOC writers. As always, we have an amazing panel. We're talking to Celeste Yim, who served as a writer on Saturday Night Live, Greg Iwinski, who served as a writer on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and Iwinski is also a member of the WGA Negotiating Committee, John Thibodeaux, who served as a writer on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Naima Pearce, who served as a writer on a Black Lady sketch show, and Tim Barnes, who served as a writer on The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. What's up, y'all? How y'all doing?
What's
We're doing.
We're served. We're serving the panel.
Absolutely. I know this is going to be a fun-filled conversation because you guys are writers, but obviously we have serious topics to discuss. So last Friday, the WGA and AMPTP came together for the first time in 3 months to discuss whether or not contract negotiations could resume. It was a complete bust. No agreement was made. The WGA said the AMPTP was willing to increase on a few rights to big minimums like AI, but wouldn't engage in the preservation of the writer's room or success-based residuals, among other items like healthcare benefit extension, the reinstatement of striking writers. In the meantime, the AMPTP said that it needs to consult with its member studios before moving forward. So this first question is for Greg. You have a seat at the table. Where did the impasse happen? What's going on?
Well, I think part of the reason that we had to walk away and why we got such a strong strike vote, back in April and leading to May 1st was most of the core proposals we have got no response at all. So, we were in there negotiating for 6 weeks straight. And, the final weekend, it's like, hey, are you going to talk to us about AI? Are you going to talk to us about writer rooms? Are you going to talk to us about any of this stuff, about late night and streaming? And the answer was no, we're not going to talk to you about those. So it makes it really hard to get a deal, I think. And what is disappointing, I think, about where we seem to find ourselves is that there's still a lot of unwillingness to negotiate on those things. There are proposals out there that writers have talked about left and right, but if there's no counter, there's no negotiation. So I'm not going to negotiate against myself. I'm not going to say, hey, I'm asking for this much. I mean, especially as people of color, we're not going, hey, we deserve this, but we'll take this or maybe this. Oh, please don't be mad. Give us this. It's like, this is what we asked for. You haven't said anything back. We're 100 days in. And when you have responses, we're very happy to talk about them. So I think it's actually a hopeful sign that there were talks, that it wasn't a long-term freeze out, that somebody somewhere wanted to at least sit at a table. Obviously didn't lead to open negotiations, but let's keep going. And when those topics are ready to be talked about, very excited to talk about
them. Just in terms of, how is it mentally, emotionally, 3 months in, you're doing this work, heading closer to the holidays? What are your thoughts when you get this close, but still things are, they're at a halt?
Well, I feel like everyone's in this for the long haul, and we've all voted in various ways and are in agreement of what needs to happen just for the future of writing in general. So it is very, very tough. Everyone's making a lot of personal sacrifices and making choices on their own behalf for how to survive during this time. But we do want to come to an agreement, and we do want to work again. This isn't a big party, that we can all easily do. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I'm going to pass it back to Greg really quick. Talking about representation and what it means. You're a Black man. You are representing as a member of the WGA Negotiating Committee. Why is it important for you to have a seat at the table?
I don't know that it's important that I have this seat, but I think it's important that a late night writer of color has it, because late night is a small percentage-wise chunk of the Writers Guild, but we have incredibly huge influence because the shows that you make are watched by so many different people and set so much conversation and decide what we talk about and how. There is a huge influence there, and I think late night writers know what it's like when you write this dumb little joke show and then very famous people come up to you and they're like, oh my gosh, I love that thing you did, or oh, you kept me sane during Trump, or whatever they say, and you're like, oh cool, I also like your giant movie. So even though we're not, a half of the guild, we do have an impact. And I think that has to be fought for with the companies, because traditionally they've picked off screenwriters and comedy variety and late night writers as people who they go, well, it's not most of the writers, so maybe we just won't give them what they want and no one will fight for them. So I think it's important that we're there in the room. And also I think as a writer of color and a late night writer of color, we are just entering our era of late night being people of color, not just having to be the people of color. I mean, like I've known Celeste, we're just meeting right now, but everybody else on here I've known for a while. Tibbs and I have done comedy together for over a decade. And when he and I do comedy, it's not as two people of color. It's that he's very dumb and I'm very frustrated. And that is a dynamic that transcends race or anything. And we are getting into a place now where in late night, we can just be that. And so it's important that we fight to make sure that late night is paid fairly and that it keeps being a place that people can make TV and afford to pay rent here. So I'm happy to be the person fighting for that. But anyone on here would have been great as well.
Yeah, just in terms of, I think one of the biggest conversations that's come out of the strike is just representation and the amount of diversity that's not only on screen, but also behind the scenes. So I'm going to ask you guys all a question. How many times have you experienced being the only writer of color in a writer's room, whether it be late night or just any writer's room? Greg, okay. Okay. And
a majority of my career, perhaps. Yeah. Showing up when I first got my first TV job, I looked around, I was the only one. So it's an experience, especially coming up through the improv ranks, where it's like very used to being the only one. And then a bunch of friends in Chicago were all the only ones. And we started an improv group called Three-Peat, and we're still going. We just did a show in Baltimore. So it's like that experience can be an isolating one, but if you reach out beyond your small circle, it also can be a unifying one. We found a bunch of people who had a similar experience, but the goal is that shouldn't be the experience for anyone anymore. Every year they put out the Hollywood diversity report, and kudos for making the report, but it doesn't seem like it's getting very much better. And it's especially important for late night writers of color because it's the first rung on the ladder that sort of Greg alluded to. It's the way to get into the industry. And these agreements affect us more because a majority of the people are working under that minimum basic agreement. That's what these negotiations are about. They're about, what do you deserve at a bare minimum? And what writers are basically saying is we deserve to afford to live in the places that we make these shows, and we deserve to be able to feed and clothe ourselves. And the studios are essentially saying, well, we don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you, Naima, you were writing on what may have been the only comedy variety show that had a writer's room entirely made up of Black people, specifically Black women. You also gave a lot of opportunities to first-time writers. How has the strike or how could the strike impact opportunities that, foster a pipeline for not only newcomers, but specifically Black women?
It's huge. I think, and in the time that I was in the room, it was during, we were a remote room during hybrid lockdown sessions. And that removed a lot of barriers to entry for people. And so it was an exciting place to have a lot of first-time writers in there that ordinarily might not have been able to be a part of that space because a lot of rooms just take place in the most expensive cities to live in the United States. And it's going to continually get more expensive. And it was a special place to be with a room like all women of color. I had not written on a show with, I think, another Black woman at that point. And so it was exciting. And it was so much of it was like an exciting creative process, but also just information sharing and how the system actually works. When you get your first writing job, you're like, oh, this is great money. But you see that it's for such a limited amount of time and it's so hard to get your next gig. So it becomes a space for information sharing. And I think a big thing about this strike is everybody was, like John said, isolated in some way in their rooms, being in just a minority or the only person of color in the room. But there was just a lot more talking during the strike about how we are getting, for lack of a better word, screwed, and feeling a little less alone, and how you're struggling to make ends meet, where you think it might be like a personal failure of should I just be funnier? And it's not that, it's systemic. What a surprise.
Mm-hmm. And Celeste, would you say you relate to that experience?
Yeah, totally. I mean, luckily when I joined SNL, I was not the only person of color, but I was one of them, and it does feel slow to change. I mean, even on picket lines, there is an overt lack of diversity, like the strike being a class issue makes it a race issue. And the reality is that we make up a very small percentage of the industry. And I think so many of us are used to our identities being exceptional. And, when I started doing stand-up in 2014, I was like the only working Asian comedian in Toronto, and every show I did was historic. But now I'm like, I feel that still, I'm one of the only queer people of color in a leadership position in late night television. And I want to keep it that way. No, I I take that responsibility very seriously, because it's so slow to change. Like, obviously comedy is so much about point of view and shared identity, and this like catch-22 where in order for the talent pool to change, the leadership needs to change, but the leadership can't change, so the talent pool changes. So it feels lucky that like it's rare now to be the only like person of color but in a room, but I do just feel like we're still waiting, and I feel like I'm gonna be like posting representation matters like on my deathbed or whatever. So yeah, I really.
Is it daunting? It's reality, and I know a part of what you guys do is like laughing to keep from crying. But when you think about that, how realistic do you think? Because I feel like that's something that's been thrown around a lot within the strike, is what's realistic and what's not realistic. Diversity is realistic, as we've seen, with the success of many BIPOC-led shows, films. It works. Our stories matter. In the height of all of this, and like you said, Celeste, that's something also that another writer of color had told me about, and something that when I was at the picket lines reporting, it didn't even come into my mind, because I guess I'm so used to seeing there being more non-POC people in spaces. But they pointed that out to me too, was like, as you can see at the picket lines, like, who's out here? And it's not because there's not enough, BIPOC talent. It's just, people are not looking for them, and the opportunities are not as accessible. So when you think about that, is that daunting? And I'll give that to John.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit daunting anytime you try to project out like a whole movement of an industry and you're one person. Like, what can I do to help this? You can just do, what you do, and is that you exist in those spaces and make it welcoming for the people to come along after you. That's the daunting aspect of it. And I think what makes this even more sort of daunting from a BIPOC perspective is that, like, in the wake of George Floyd, it felt like we got like so much conversation starting, maybe not as much action, obviously not as much action as we would have hoped, but there was at least a conversation. And then, that sort of seemed to recede away. And in fact, like a few weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, there was like 3 different diversity coordinators who all just like packed their bags and left the same day. And if that was like a blow, it's like, their whole job was to forward this agenda, and they said, fuck it, we can't do it. So that sort of is a blow. And that even makes it feel more daunting. But the best cure I find is just to break it down into the smallest problem that you can solve, which is try to be a beacon and pull up as many people as you can.
Absolutely. Let's get into the lack of diversity in late night, not just, in the writer's room, but on screen. For years we had Trevor Noah as one of the only people of color, or the only person of color who was hosting a late night television series. We had Z-Way on Showtime. Amber Ruffin is still on Peacock. Why are we still in this drought when it comes to BIPOC talent on TV late night shows? And I'll give that to Tim.
Yeah, that's you gave me one of the heaviest questions of the whole panel. Why is this? Well, I know one of my first, I wasn't a writer, but I was a producer on Wyatt's Next Problem Areas on HBO. And that gave me a glimpse of how much pressure goes on someone's shoulders when they are about to be a Black late night host. And the questions of what does it mean to be a Black late night host? How do I stand out enough so that I'm not labeled as a Black late night host? And I think those are also the questions that it kind of mirrors what it's like to be the only Black writer on a staff as well. There's a lot of weight on those shoulders. John mentioned the George Floyd protests and how I'm sure all of us got general meetings in that time. I was in the surreal position of I had just started at a couple weeks before the police murder of George Floyd. I had just started working at the Tonight Show in the pandemic. We're all in our apartments. I'm just trying to get used to the show. And then after it was on a hiatus that it all happened, and I logged on to Zoom after the hiatus, and oh my goodness, I'm the only Black person in the Zoom, and that's it felt like a Twilight Zone episode. And I wasn't there have been plenty of Black writers on the Tonight Show, and there have been plenty of Black writers since, but I was in this interesting space where I was the only Black writer on the show for that period. And that was a strange amount of pressure that I'm still unpacking. I'm in some ways glad that I got to experience that, because I think it gave me a little bit more focus for everything that I do moving forward. But on that same note, it does feel like there is this fear of just being the flavor of the moment when you get that opportunity to be a Black host or a Black writer on a show. And once the sort of entertainment or pop culture tides shift, there's the fear that you're quickly gonna, people are gonna move on from there. So you're always trying to push past the label of just being the Black host or the blank host, and just be a host. I feel like.
I was gonna say, is it kind of like the Obama effect, where once he got into the office, it was okay, what's he doing? Every every move that he makes is, critiqued.
Historic or critiqued, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. How easy was it for you all, and this is for anyone who wants to answer, how easy was it for you to speak out, when situations like George Floyd, happened, when there's a lot of outcry? I mean, we all know what videos going around right now. When situations, happen that impact people of color, how comfortable are you speaking about it in a writer's room, especially when it comes to making content for a show?
Well, I can speak to that, and I think that it's crucial to have so many more people of color in a room when that happens, because when you're the only Black person in the room, everybody cranes their neck and they're like, okay, what you are about to say is going to set the tone for an entire people. And it's we're here to make jokes. And there has to be more than one kind of joke. This can't be the only perspective. It's not like there is a Black perspective on something. There's many. And so you get a burden, this burden of a typecast representation when you really just need multiple kinds. And especially if you are, if you are so lucky to climb in positions in your show, which there are not many places to climb in comedy variety, unfortunately. But if you are, you were then expected to really toe the line for the studio more often, and that's pretty emphasized. And to lose more of a perspective, then you need a show that has edge as well as just being able to be a solve which I think a lot of people do turn to late night for as well.
And how do you navigate that? You know, wanting to, because you, in a sense, you do have a responsibility as either the only person of color or one of the few. I know for me, I feel a responsibility at being at a large trade and saying, you know, hey, these are the stories that I think we need to tell. When you speak about pressures, how are you navigating that and keeping yourself sane at the same time? I'll give that to John.
Just cliche answers. How do you navigate the pressure? Self-care. I don't know. Make sure you are talking to people who you need to talk to, your family, your therapist, your significant other. And it's really, I'm just hearkening back at what I said earlier. It's like almost just like take it a day at a time. And it's important to celebrate really hard the small victories, because in this business, you don't know when another victory's going to come. And also don't get caught up on the failure, because there's so much failure and you just got to learn to keep moving forward. I mean, that applies to struggles with diversity as well as, like, you know, trying to sell a pilot. It's the same idea.
There's so much nuance that goes into what late night is. And it does, I think it goes across sketch and you know, monologue, is what in pop culture, current events, politics is making people anxious, and how do they want to laugh at it? And that's different for so many kinds of people. It's a change the whole industry is going through, and it's going to be difficult and rocky, because this group here which would be an insane writer's room of killers, like, but how we would respond to the amazing Alabama brawl. What's funny about it? What makes us upset about it? What do we want to laugh at? What do we think is ridiculous? Might be very different than an all-white room. One, because they have a different reference base, but also where they're uncomfortable, we might not be uncomfortable, and our audience might not be uncomfortable. And so you're trying to mush this stuff together for not just that everybody in the room, because I think a lot of writers of all races and backgrounds can go, I don't really get it. Everyone's laughing. It's good to go. It's about somebody is sitting at home watching an affiliate television or watching on their phone at like 11:30 at night, and they're stressed out after the day. And are you making them able to relax? And so that's where I think there's a conflict sometimes where, yes, we might make something that's good and that we love, but there's a studio out there going, well, there's a lot of suburban white people who are going to be really uncomfortable with this. And so then you're like, oh, well, I did the job you told me to. I made something good, relevant, funny. I made it really fast, and I made it for no money. And they go, yeah, but we kind of don't like the jokes about the chairs, the folding chairs. And you're like, can you explain why? And they go, no, we can't. I'm sorry. It's too urban, and then it's gone. And so I think there is this back and forth where we are moving a big ship really slowly. And I think we will get there because we're very talented and we had to work really hard because our dads don't like run banks and gave us the writing jobs. So I am excited for the future of it. But like Tib said, I think you take those small victories and you go, look, I've got proof I can do it over and over again. When Zion Williamson was playing at Duke and he exploded his shoe, I can remember Tibbs and I are like, this is it. We're going to get basketball on the Late Show. And the video of Obama going, his shoe broke in like slow motion blew up the room. We were like, we did it. And we did like 45 seconds on Zion Williamson. And it was like, great. I think of that now. Like, got it in the pocket. We did it. You just take the joys that you have and you blow off the other stuff. And yeah, but it's all about just riding out that nuance and understanding that that's just part of our job.
Greg, you brought something up in the prep call that I wanted to chat about, and just the opportunities that people of color do not often get over and over again in the same ways that non-POC people get. Particularly, you have mentioned that Z-Way got 6 episodes, and was this in her pilot season?
In each of those seasons. And I think you see what's interesting is there's all these questions about like who can host a late night show. Like we talk about this all the time. That's my dream is hosting a late night show. Lots of writers' dream is hosting their own show, doing it their own way. But if you look at traditionally the hosts that we remember a lot, the ones from those 11:30, 12:30 shows, they got so many chances. I grew up watching Conan. I loved Conan. But he tells the stories like Brian Stack, who works at Colbert now. every week. They were going week to week to week, but they got all these chances to build the show, find the show. Fallon at 12:30 doing, Lick It for 10 and like random stuff that they could just find and building the show and then finding the show. All of these people who have the pedigrees that a lot of people of color now have. They've written for shows for a long time. They have awards. They've got connections. They've got performing experience. What seems to be happening now is like those chairs, when they come up again, we'll see where they go. But if you're a person of color, it's like, okay, here are 6 episodes each year that we're going to call a season. So you have 6 half hours. So like Z-Way gets a show, Sam J gets a show. Like people get a Black Lady Sketch Show comes out. These shows come out with people of color, a lot of times with women of color. And all year long, the network promotes that they have women of color on their network and they're diverse. And look at all the, wow, look at us reaching out to different audiences. But in reality, a bunch of writers and people are working for like 2 months or 3 months to make those episodes. And then the rest of the year are left hanging to see if they'll come back a year later after 9 months of maybe being on the hook, but not even getting paid. So go away for 9 months and maybe we'll let you do a season 2. What are you going to do in between? Don't know. And then come back again for a total amount of content, which is 2.5 hours, which that is, you make more late show than that in 3 days. You make more SNL than that in 2 weeks. But you're taking someone's whole show where they're going to build an identity, they're going to build an audience and a following and a brand and a voice. And you're saying, well, if you can't do it in 2.5 hours a year, I guess we'll just like kind of let your show get canceled after 2 or 3 seasons. That's not being set up for success. It's being set up to be showcased, which is at a great advantage in February. But it's not setting someone up for success. I think of Last Week Tonight. That first season was over 20 episodes out the gate. First season was, that's a lot of chances to get it right and some chances where you get it wrong. And so in that even, we need to enter an era where people of color, writer, performers of color, hosts of color are given that same kind of chance to find their voice and find the show's voice and find that audience, because it turns out there are a lot of people out there. And if 3 million people watch your show, it's like the biggest hit in late night. At least like I remember when I was at Colbert, I was like, we're number one. 3.1 million people watch us a night. So a little less than 1% of America watches us every night. And we're the biggest show in this kind of television. Like, do you think there's not 3 million black people out there that want to watch a show? There are. So we just need to be given the same chance and time, because let Tibbs or Tim or Naima or Celeste go up there and flop sweat for 4 weeks figuring out the show. And then you're going to have a show that works for 15 years. That's just the chance that we need.
I was going to say too, I almost feel like Black people, people of color, have to have a proof of concept before. Like with Z-Way, she had her show on Instagram. And I mean, Z-Way was my show. Like, I loved it. I watched her when she was doing her Instagram lives. And I'm sure that helped her get, her Showtime show. And even with Issa Rae, she had to have this proof of concept. Like, yeah, people are watching on YouTube. She gets a show. Is that theory in any way correct? Like, are the opportunities that are given to people of color only because they had to do it themselves first?
I think a lot of it comes back to who the executives are and who are the people making these types of decisions, because I think in the vacuum of their inability to understand the product, they lean on what they think is a proven someone who brings their own audience, right? So like, I don't understand why these people like this thing. So I don't know, but there's enough people on Instagram Live. Let's just bring that over here. Whereas if you had people in the decision-making apparatus who understood those types of products, they could and greenlight things that and give things more of a chance, like Greg was saying.
Absolutely. Pivoting to just the excitement around the shows, promoting your show specifically. So the WGA allows the writers to post about shows they've worked on, but writers cannot do promotion at the request of the studio, nor can they be part of any studio organized media opportunities. What are the pros and cons of this, especially in terms of, BIPOC led shows? Is this, of course you want to be a part of the strike, but is it hurting, the success of what could be a successful show, in the long run? And I'll give that to Celeste.
I have no idea. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely, I think about this with SNL a lot. Like, so many people watch the show, like, on Instagram and see sketches on Instagram, like, that aren't watching it live on Saturdays. And I think there is, like, a really interesting thing happening with our show where, because there's so many different kinds of performers, like, it is, like, a true variety show right now. Like, we have people who are stand-ups and who come from sketch and who come from online, like videos. People do find like the cast members that they like and wait for them to post, so I definitely see that economy, like, while we're in production. It's tough that, like, so much of the onus to build an audience does fall on individuals. It makes no sense. It's so difficult to do. Like, I think the idea that you have to be like a skilled social media manager and know how to Photoshop like your own posters and like edit your own videos, like, in order to get the chance to get a job is pretty wild. So yeah, I think that it just kind of exacerbates an already existing problem.
Yeah, for sure. Has the strike taken any of you guys' like enthusiasm away from the shows that you guys have worked on, like in terms of promoting them?
Like, my show came out. It debuted 3 days after the strike. So there's this show. It's called Young Jedi Adventures. After doing some late night stuff, they were like, "Hey, do you want to do a Star Wars show for preschoolers?" And I love Star Wars and have preschoolers, so I was like, "Yes." Well, first I was like, "Is this canon?" And they said yes, and then I said, "Okay, yes, I'll do it." I worked on that for like a year, and then it came out 3 days after the strike started, and I was like, "This sucks," because it's not, because I haven't done a lot of promotion of it. Just because that's kind of the point of the thing is that we're shutting down the pipeline, but that hasn't dampened my support either for the strike or for the show. I think they're both great, and I love what I'm doing. It's just understanding that this is just one of those times, and also I think in terms of with the guild and letting people do their own posting, I don't think that studios know how to find the people we're talking to. So in terms of like us talking about our shows and talking about what we loved we made, or my show came out, or I did this thing, or check this out, those people are, I think the people that we're reaching with on our own social media talking about our work are not the people that are getting hit with a big studio campaign anyway. So I think I'm talking to people that like in the Star Wars community that I like about the show, as opposed to whoever would get hit with a campaign.
If I can jump in, I think there's a complication when you're talking to friends who are outside of the guild or the industry, and they're just like, "We want to support you. Should we stop watching everything right now?" And you're like, "No," and confused when you do promote something. And so I think I've used it as an opportunity where you're like, "Oh, I wrote this funny thing, and I wish I could do more of it right now." But we're on strike, and it's because I was not paid enough to live to write this funny thing. And so you guys should know about it if you enjoy television. Popular thing to say on a picket, like honk if you've watched a TV show. And it's just hitting everyone. And then I know I was working on a show the day the strike was announced, and like the episode of the show I was working on was going to film the first day of the strike, if the strike is going to happen. So we were just sitting in the office waiting, like, how do we talk about this? Like, I'm excited. I co-wrote this episode. We're filming it in front of a live studio audience. Am I going to be there? No. It turns out as of midnight, I'm not. So it's a complicated thing to talk about. But I think it helps a broader audience like understand the stakes and the consequences of a strike like this.
Absolutely. As we look into the future, what are you hoping for And this is going to be for everybody to answer. What are you hoping for? And if you have a message for the AMPTP, what would it be?
What am I hoping for? I'm just hoping for a fair and balanced system. AMPTP, AMT. I know you're watching. Let's just fair, checks and balances, fairness, equality, diversity. Let's get back to work.
Greg? Oh, Celeste, were you raising your hand? Go ahead.
I was just giving Tim a big thumbs up. Well, I think so much about the '07 strike. I always wanted to be a writer, and that strike did secure my career. So a big motivation for me to keep striking until I feel confident that future careers will be secured. MPTP, I want to buy groceries, and I want to have a doctor and have a happy, normal life. Please let me. And my friend, please, I love you. I can maybe learn to love you. Yeah, the future of the strike is scaring the shit out of me. Sorry, can I swear? Sorry.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, SNL was my first job, so it took me a while to understand that it's so exceptional. It's not lost on me that SNL is one of the only shows that guarantees a minimum number of episodes, a livable income, substantial residuals, and it just is so wild to me that you have to work at one of the oldest, most famous shows in the world to have basic job security. And even at our show, it can be so tenuous. So, MPTP, please make it normal. Okay.
AMPTP, joke's on you. I don't have a house to lose. So I can wait this thing out. Never made enough to afford one in the first place. That's all I got.
I will say in the history of labor negotiations, labor is always right. I mean, we're all on the right side of history, and everything that we enjoy, like Celeste said, working at SNL or working at the Late Show, established places we enjoy because other people fought for us. It's our turn. It's our turn to fight for the people who come after us. And as far as how long I think this will last, it'll last as long as it needs to last. And don't underestimate writers, because we're used to going between gigs and we can hold out. And we're not asking for anything that's unreasonable. We just want to be able to live. And people throughout the country have taken notice. UPS resolved their issue. There are other unions all authorizing their members to strike in upcoming negotiations. I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but I know they're out there. And we're on the right side of history. Fix it, It's part of the labor movement. I'm happy to be part of it, because this is the only way working people get respect in this country, is to withhold our services until the people in the boardrooms take notice. And when are they going to take notice? I don't know. My bet mid-fall, but we'll see.
I think I have a small or a focused goal or vision of the future, and then a larger scale one. But the smaller one is that in this contract, we win the very basic thing we're asking for, which is that if you make a late night show on streaming, it pays the same that it pays on TV, because it takes the exact same amount of work, use the same cameras in the same studio for the same cost, and it just should pay the same because it's the same thing, which the AMPTP said yes to 7 years ago when they did it with episodic TV. They said, oh yeah, they're the same thing, we'll pay the same. And late night has not had that catch up. That's all we want. We're not asking that we each all get to host a show a week, or that we get a special Emmy for being the funniest joke that didn't get on TV. We're just asking, please pay us the same, which is just hire us 3 months at a time so we can tell our spouses or partners that we will have a place to live for 3 months. We can put our kids in school with the security of that, instead of the proposal of paying us a day at a time, which I don't know if any of the MPTP live in New York, but you will not qualify for an apartment that way. So please just move it on over. It's very cheap. That's the whole deal of our work part. My larger goal is that, like Tib said, this is part of a part of a bigger labor movement of the country, the people of the country asserting that their work has dignity, that they have dignity. And that this idea that a bunch of like very sad tech bros in the Valley came up with, where they're like, well, because no one loves me, why don't I make it the 1930s? That's not going to work. Going into industry after industry to destroy labor protections, cut all costs, and then get the stock price big before you cash out is not a sustainable model for them, and it's not a sustainable model for this country. We make the most successful entertainment product in the world, where for decades and decades, everyone did really well. They have messed that up. It takes a unique kind of historical moment to get two guilds on strike against you. So hopefully this is a moment where, from UPS workers to flight attendants to writers to directors to IATSE and the Teamsters and all the other people who are much less in the spotlight than us, but also feel the weight of the AMPTP, that this is a universal fight for dignity where we reset what labor means in this country.
Absolutely.
I'm so happy Greg was on the panel. Thank God.
I'm thankful that you all were. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation. Greg, Naima, John, Celeste, and Tim, thank you so much. And also to everyone who tuned in to BIPOC Late Night and Variety Writers Speak Out. You can stay up to date on all news regarding the strike on TheWrap.com. We also encourage you to check out our Wrap Pro membership hub, which is focused on serving professionals in the entertainment space. And please be sure to save the date for October 4th for this year's Grill, Wrap Pro's annual conference focused on the convergence of entertainment, media, and technology. More details soon to come. Thanks so much, guys.